I have not opened this book since the last time we met.
Were you here 2 weeks ago?
I was,
Oh, good, good.
but it's been a busy 2 weeks. So I'd like to get oriented to where we are and what we're going to do, and then be able to meditate and bring attention to the text. For me, that would be it'd be useful to have a transition like that.
Yeah. Yeah, we seem to
Fantastic.
finish that first section of the Canto 3, but I think that's as far as we got, right? Finishing there gleamed the dawn of a spiritual day. That's where we stopped.
Page 26.
Okay. Oh, so I actually had read the whole canto before. I have passages underlined all over, but we only read through the first part.
Through.
Yeah.
I think it is our second time through the Yoga of the Soul's Release. Do I remember that right?
I think that would have been a miracle because I think you left off where you were reading the issue, starting with the issue last session, no?
I don't think we've read all the way through it yet. I think we've just gotten to page 26 in our first reading.
Yeah.
Did you do a deep discussion or did you only do a reading?
Oh, we did a discussion.
On section 1?
On that opening section, yes.
Oh, great.
Yeah.
Great. So maybe I'll propose, and I'm super open to whatever, but maybe we reread that first section, then read the second section and stop for a discussion.
Yeah, that sounds good to me.
Okay. Oh, the second section is quite long. I think it goes to 34.
Yeah. He based his life upon eternity. Is that the end of the second section?
Yeah, unless I'm missing an indent. No. Yes, he based his life upon eternity.
So that's good.
Good. Oh, so how about we just establish an order then? So we'll read the first 2 sections and then we'll stop at that point to discuss.
Right.
So let's establish an order. How is Jeffrey, Marco, Andrea, Matteo, John, Robert?
That sounds good. I just got an ominous warning from my computer about application memory. Everything seems fine. I'm going to quit some other things, but in case I pop out, I might need to restart my computer or something like that, and I'd come right back.
Okay, how about you do that and we'll just chat for a minute or something and see how it plays out. If you drop off, maybe we'll meditate. Yeah, take care of that and let's see what happens.
Okay, well, I think if I just quit Firefox, that should take care of it. I seem to have an issue with that program. So why don't let's continue. I think it's okay.
Okay, so we'll meditate and then Jeffrey, 1 page, reading 1 page each. Jeffrey, Marco, Andrea, Matteo, John, Robert.
Okay. Canto 3, the Yoga of the King, the Yoga of the Soul's Release. A world's desire compelled her mortal birth. One in the front of the immemorial quest, protagonist of the mysterious play in which the unknown pursues himself through forms and limits his eternity by the hours, and the blind void struggles to live and see. A thinker and toiler in the ideal's air, brought down to earth's dumb need, her radiant power. His was a spirit that stooped from larger spheres into our province of ephemeral sight, a colonist from immortality. A pointing beam on earth's uncertain roads, his birth held up a symbol and a sign. His human self, like a translucent cloak, covered the all-wise who leads the unseeing world. Affiliated to cosmic space and time, and paying there here God's debt to earth and man, a greater sonship was his divine right. Although consenting to mortal ignorance, his knowledge shared the light ineffable, a strength of the original permanence entangled in the moment and its flow. He kept the vision of the vasts behind. A power was in him from the unknowable. An archivist of the symbols of the beyond, a treasurer of superhuman dreams, he bore the stamp of mighty memories and shed their grandiose ray on human life. His days were a long growth to the supreme, a skyward being nourishing its roots on sustenance from occult spiritual founts, climbed through white rays to meet an unseen sun.
His soul lived as eternity's delegate. His mind was like a fire assailing heaven. His will a hunter in the trails of light. An ocean impulse lifted every breath. Each action left the footprints of a god. Each moment was a beat of puissant wings. The little plot of our mortality, touched by this tenant from the heights, became a playground of the living infinite. This bodily appearance is not all. The form deceives. The person is a mask. Hid deep in man, celestial powers can dwell. His fragile ship conveys through the sea of years an incognito of the imperishable. A spirit that is a flame of God abides, a fiery portion of the wonderful, artist of his own beauty and delight, immortal in our mortal poverty. This sculptor of the forms of the infinite, this screened, unrecognized inhabitant, initiate of his own veiled mysteries, hides in a small dumb seed his cosmic thought. In the mute strength of the occult idea, determining predestined shape and act, passenger from life to life, from scale to scale, changing his imaged self from form to form. He regards the icon growing by his gaze, and in the worm foresees the coming God. At last the traveler in the paths of time arrives on the frontiers of eternity. In the transient symbol of humanity draped, he feels his substance of undying self and loses his kinship to mortality. A beam of the eternal smiles his heart. His thought stretches into infinitude. All in him turns to spirit vastnesses.
His soul breaks out to join the oversoul. His life is oceaned by that super life. He has drunk from the breasts of the mother of the worlds. A topless supernature fills his frame. She adopts his spirit's everlasting ground as the security of her changing world and shapes the figure of her unborn mites. Immortally she conceives herself in him. In the creature, the unveiled creatrix works. Her face is seen through his face, her eyes through his eyes. Her being is his through a vast identity. Then is revealed in man the overt divine. Ecstatic oneness and dynamic power descend in him. The integral Godhead seals. The soul and body take that splendid stamp. A long, dim preparation is man's life. A circle of toil and hope and war and peace, tracked out by life on matter's obscure ground. In his climb to a peak no feet have ever trod, he seeks through a penumbra shot with flame, a veiled reality, half known, ever missed, a search for something or someone never found, cult of an ideal never made real here, an endless spiral of ascent and fall, until at last is reached the giant point through which his glory shines, for whom we were made, and we break into the infinity of God. Across our nature's borderline we escape into supernature's arc of living light. This now was witnessed in that Son of Force. In him that high transition laid its base. Original and supernal immanence, of which all nature's process is the art, the cosmic worker set his secret hand to turn this frail mud engine to heaven use.
A presence wrought behind the ambiguous screen. A presence wrought behind the ambiguous screen. It beat his soil to bear a titan's weight. Refining half-hewn blocks of natural strength, it built his soul into a statured God. The craftsman of the magic stuff of self, who labors at his high and difficult plan in the wide workshop of the wonderful world, modeled in inward time his rhythmic parts. Then came the abrupt, transcendent miracle, the masked, immaculate grandeur could outline. At travail, in the occult womb of life, his dreamed magnificence of things to be, a crown of the architecture of the worlds, a mystery of married earth and heaven, annexed divinity to the mortal scheme. A seer was born, a shining guest of time. For him, mind's limiting firmament ceased above. In the griffin forefront of the night and day, a gap was rent in the all-concealing vault. The conscious ends of being went rolling back. The landmarks of the little person fell. The island ego joined its continent. Overpast was this world of rigid, limiting forms. Life's barriers opened into the unknown. Abolished were conceptions, covenants, and striking off subjection's rigorous clause annulled the soul's treaty with nature's nescience. All the gray inhibitions were torn off and broken, the intellect's hard and lustrous lid. Truth, unpartitioned, found immense sky room, and Empyrean vision saw and knew. The bounded mind became a boundless light. The finite self mated with infinity. His march now soared into an eagle's flight. Out of apprenticeship to ignorance, wisdom upraised him to her master craft and made him an arch mason of the soul, a builder of the immortal's secret house, an aspirant to supernal timelessness. Freedom and empire called to him from on high, above mind's twilight and life's star-led night. There gleamed the dawn of a spiritual day.
As so he grew into his larger self. Humanity framed his movements less and less. A greater being saw a greater world. A fearless will for knowledge dared to erase the lines of safety reason draws that bar minds soar, souls dive into the infinite. Even his first steps broke our small earth bounds and loitered in a vaster, freer air. In hands sustained by a transfiguring might, he caught up lightly like a giant's bow, left slumbering in a sealed and secret cave, the powers that sleep unused in man within. He made a miracle and normal act, and turned to a common part of divine works, magnificently natural at this height, efforts that would shatter the strength of mortal hearts. pursued in a royalty of mighty ease, aims too sublime for nature's daily will. Gifts of the Spirit crowding came to him. They were his life's pattern and his privilege. A pure perception lent its lucent joy. Its intimate vision waited not to think. It enveloped all nature in a single glance. It looked into the very self of things. Deceived no more by form, he saw the soul. In beings, it knew what lurked to them unknown. It seized the idea in mind, the wish in the heart. It plucked out from gray folds of secrecy the motives which from their own sight men hide.
He felt the beating life in other men invade him with their happiness and their grief, their love, their anger, their unspoken hopes entered in currents or in pouring waves into the immobile ocean of his calm. He heard the inspired sound of his own thoughts re-echoed in the vaults of other minds. The world's thought streams traveled into his ken. His inner self grew near to other selves and bore a kinship's weight, a common tie, yet stood untouched, king of itself alone. A magical accord quickened and attuned to ethereal symphonies the old earthy strings. It raised the servitors of mind and life to be happy partners in the soul's response. Tissue and nerve were turned to sensitive chords, records of luster and ecstasy. It made the body's means the spirit's acolytes. A heavenlier function with a finer mode lit with its grace man's outward earthliness. The soul's experience of its deeper sheaths no more slept drugged by matter's dominance. In the dead wall closing us from wider self into a secrecy of apparent sleep, the mystic tract beyond our waking thoughts, a door parted, built in by matter's force, releasing things unseized by earthly sense, a world unseen, unknown by outward mind, appeared in the silent spaces of the soul. He sat in secret chambers, looking out into the luminous countries of the unborn, where all things dreamed by the mind are seen and true, and all that the life longs for is drawn close.
He saw the perfect in their starry homes, wearing the glory of a deathless form, lain in the arms of the Eternal's peace, wrapped in the heartbeats of God ecstasy. He lived in the mystic space where thought is born and will is nursed by an ethereal power, and fed on the white milk of the Eternal's strengths, till it grows into the likeness of a god. In the witnesses' occult rooms, with mind-built walls on hidden interiors, lurking passages opened the windows of the inner sight. He owned the house of undivided time. Lifting the heavy curtain of the flesh, he stood upon a threshold, serpent watched, and peered into gleaming endless corridors, silent and listening in the silent heart for the coming of the new and the unknown. He gazed across the empty stillnesses and heard the footsteps of the undreamed idea in the far avenues of the beyond. He heard the secret voice, the word that knows, and saw the secret face that is our own. The inner planes uncovered their crystal doors. Strange powers and influences touched his life. A vision came of higher realms than ours, a consciousness of brighter fields and skies, of beings less circumscribed than brief-lived men, and subtler bodies than these passing frames, objects too fine for our material grasp, acts vibrant with a superhuman light, and movements pushed by a superconscient force, and joys that never flowed through mortal limbs, and lovelier scenes than earth's, and happier lives. A consciousness of beauty and of bliss, a knowledge which became what it perceived, replaced the separated sense and heart, and drew all nature into its embrace. The mind leaned out to meet the hidden worlds. Air glowed and teemed with marvelous shapes and hues. In the nostrils quivered celestial fragrances. On the tongue lingered the honey of paradise.
A channel of universal harmony, hearing was a stream of magic audience, a bed for occult sounds earth cannot hear. Out of a covert tract of slumber self, the voice came of a truth submerged, unknown, that flows beneath the cosmic surfaces, only mid an omniscient silence heard, held by intuitive heart and secret sense. It caught the burden of secrecy sealed and dumb. It voiced the unfulfilled demand of earth and the song of promise of unrealized heavens and all that hides in an omnipotent sleep. In the unceasing drama carried by time on its long listening flood that bears the world's insoluble doubt on a pilgrimage without goal, a laughter of sleepless pleasure foamed and spumed, and murmurings of desire that cannot die. A cry came of the world's delight to be, the grandeur and greatness of its will to live, recall of the soul's adventure into space, a traveler through the magic centuries and being's labor in matter's universe, its search for the mystic meaning of its birth, and joy of high spiritual response, its throb of satisfaction and content in all the sweetness of the gifts of life, its large breath and pulse and thrill of hope and fear, its taste of pangs and tears and ecstasy, its rapture's poignant beat of sudden bliss, the sob of its passion and unending pain. the murmur and whisper of the unheard sounds which crowd around our hearts, but find no window to enter, swelled into a canticle of all that suffers to be still unknown, and all that labors vainly to be born, and all the sweetness none will ever taste, and all the beauty that will never be.
Inaudible to our deaf mortal ears, the wide world rhythms wove their stupendous chant, to which life strives to fit. Our rhyme beats here, melting our limits in the illimitable, tuning the finite to infinity. A low muttering rose from the subconscious caves, the stammer of the primal ignorance, answer to the inarticulate questioning there stooped, with lightning neck and thunder's wings, a radiant hymn to the inexpressible, and the anthem of the superconscient light. All was revealed there, none can here express. Vision and dream were fables spoken by truth, or symbols more veridical than fact, or were truths enforced by supernatural seals. Immortal eyes approached and looked in his, and beings of many kingdoms neared and spoke. The ever-living, whom we name as dead, could leave their glory beyond death and birth, to utter the wisdom which exceeds all phrase. The kings of evil and the kings of good, appellants at the reason's judgment seat, proclaimed the gospel of their opposites, and all believed themselves spokesmen of God. The gods of light and titans of the dark battled for his soul as for a costly prize. In every hour, loosed from the quiver of time, there rose a song of new discovery, a bow twang's hum of young experiment. Each day was a spiritual romance, as if he was born into a bright new world. Adventure leaped, an unexpected friend, and danger brought a keen, sweet tang of joy. Each happening was a deep experience.
There were high encounters, epic colloquies, and counsels came couched in celestial speech, and honeyed pleadings breathed from occult lips to help the heart to yield to rapture's call. And sweet temptations stole from beauty's realms, and sudden ecstasies from a world of bliss. It was a region of wonder and delight. All now his bright clairaudience could receive. A contact thrilled of mighty unknown things. Awakened to new unearthly closenesses. The touch replied to subtle infinities. And with the silver cry of opening gates, sight's lightnings leaped into the invisible. Ever his consciousness and vision grew. They took an ampler sweep, a loftier flight. He passed the border marked for matter's rule and passed the zone where thought replaces life. Out of this world of signs, suddenly he came into a silent self where a world was not, and looked beyond into a nameless vast. These symbol figures lost their right to live. All tokens dropped our sense can recognize. There, the heart beat no more at body's touch. There, the eyes gaze no more on beauty's shape. In rare and lucent intervals of hush, into a signless region he could soar, packed with the deep contents of formlessness, where world was into a single being wrapped, and all was known by the light of identity, and spirit was its own self-evidence. The Supreme's gaze looked out through human eyes and saw all things and creatures as itself, and knew all thought and word as its own voice.
Their unity is too close for search and clasp, and love is a yearning of the one for the one. And beauty is a sweet difference of the same, and oneness is the soul of multitude. There all the truths unite in a single truth, and all ideas rejoin reality. There, knowing herself by her own termless self, wisdom supernal, wordless, absolute, sat uncompanioned in the eternal calm, all-seeing, motionless, sovereign, and alone. There, knowledge needs not words to embody idea. Idea seeking a house in boundlessness, weary of its homeless immortality, asks not in thought's carved brilliant cell to rest, whose single window's clipped outlook on things sees only a little arc of God's vast sky. The boundless with the boundless there consorts, while there one can be wider than the world, while there one is one's own infinity. His center was no more in earthly mind, a power of sealing, while there, his center was no more in earthly minds, a power of seeing, silence filled his limbs, caught by a voiceless white epiphany into a vision that surpasses forms, into a living that surpasses life. He neared the still consciousness, sustaining all. The voice that only by speech can move the mind became a silent knowledge in the soul. The strength that only in action feels its truth was lodged now in a mute, omnipotent peace. A leisure in the labor of the worlds, a pause in the joy and anguish of the search restored the stress of nature to God's calm. A vast unanimity ended life's debate.
The war of thoughts that fathers the universe, the clash of forces struggling to prevail in the tremendous shock that lights a star, as in the building of a grain of dust. The grooves that turn their dumb ellipse in space, plowed by the seeking of the world's desire. The long regurgitations of time's flood, the torment edging the dire force of lust that wakes kinetic in earth's dullard slime and carves a personality out of mud. The sorrow by which nature's hunger is fed, the oestrus which creates with fire of pain, the fate that punishes virtue with defeat, the tragedy that destroys long happiness, the weeping of love, the quarrel of the gods, ceased in a truth which lives in its own light. His soul stood free, a witness and a king, absorbed no more in the moment-ridden flux, where mind incessantly drifts as on a raft, hurried from phenomenon to phenomenon. He abode at rest in indivisible time. As if a story long written but acted now, in his present he held his future and his past, felt in the seconds the uncounted years, and saw the hours like dots upon a page. An aspect of the unknown reality altered the meaning of the cosmic scene. This huge material universe became a small result of a stupendous force. Overtaking the moment, the eternal ray illumined that which never yet was made. Thought lay down in a mighty voicelessness. The toiling thinker widened and grew still. Wisdom transcendent touched his quivering heart. His soul could sail beyond thought's luminous bar. Mind screened no more the shoreless infinite.
Across a void, retreating sky, he glimpsed through a last glimmer and drift of vanishing stars, the superconscient realms of motionless peace, where judgment ceases and the word is mute, and the unconceived lies pathless and alone. There came not form or any mounting voice. There only were silence and the absolute. Out of that stillness mind newborn arose and woke to truths once inexpressible, and forms appeared dumbly significant, a seeing thought, a self-revealing voice. He knew the source from which his spirit came. movement was married to the immobile vast. He plunged his roots into the infinite. He based his life upon eternity.
The first sentence of the next section seems really apropos to what he's going through also. Only a while at first, these heavenlier states, these large, wide-poised upliftings could endure.
Yeah, the whole passage feels like a kind of an in-between time, right? It's like it's laying some sort of groundwork for what's coming. That's the sense I get reading it.
I wish that I was part of the discussion last week because I don't want to repeat what you all discussed, but I assume that you transitioned from Savitri to Ashwapati and the Yoga of the King, and the beginning of this, a world's desire compelled her mortal birth. This is what Ashwapati is working on. It's like the being in contact, having the soul, the infinite soul, the Atman, the portion of Brahman that's in the manifestation, having that release, the infinite release into the finite is what he's going through and what he's learning right now, to be able to be worthy to approach the Divine Mother, to ask for Savitri's birth. So we will be knee deep in Ashwapati's yoga for 20 cantos or so. The rest of this book, the rest of book 1 and all of book 2 and all of book 3, the Yoga of the Divine Mother. I don't know how to unpack this section, but I have some notes from probably the first Savitri, the first student of Savitri, K.D. Sethna, also known as Amal Kiran. And we, Andrea and John Robert and I, we have a few friends that actually studied with him. Because of K.D. Sethna, we have Sri Aurobindo's letters on Savitri. You could even say that he pestered Sri Aurobindo. The letters are sometimes quite pestering, but they're really beautiful. He teased a lot out through these letters, and he also did a book that's impossible to find. It's called Selections on Savitri, where he made subtitles for a lot of these sections in the canto. And so it helps me track these different rhythms through the cantos, looking at K.D. Sethna's subtitling of the cantos. I have a few marked if that's any help at all, but I'd love to hear just how people want to unpack this. It seems so huge to me. I don't even know where to begin.
I would like to reread a few lines that are, to me, such an incredibly beautiful description of the coming possibility of the divine being consciously manifest in us. That's at the bottom of page 31. The Supreme's gaze looked out through human eyes and saw all things and creatures as itself, and knew all thought and word as its own voice. Their unity is too close for search and clasp, and love is a yearning of the one for the one, and beauty is a sweet difference of the same. Love that line. Beauty is a sweet difference of the same, and oneness is the soul of multitude. There all the truths unite in a single truth, and all ideas rejoin reality. That's an aspiration worth having for me personally. It's like, wow, yes, I want that. I want to practice that. So beautiful.
No small aspirations for you, Andrea.
No. We got to do the thing. This is a lifetime.
In our other reading group, we're reading Walt Whitman, and the line actually right after the one you just shared, Andrea, reminds me of one of Whitman's lines, "I contain multitudes," from the Song of the Self. And I think that this is really beautiful. It also describes the journey of the soul from matter, from physical embodiment through subtle levels or subtle states to a causal or formless state, and then the realization of source in that formlessness, which I think is interesting here because it isn't maintained um, as a permanent experience. It's experienced and then is becomes the basis, as he says at the end. He based his life upon eternity. And what I experience is more of the fallen state, not so much feeling the eternity, knowing that it's there, but not always feeling that it's there. And so that very next part, the next part of the canto, the high and luminous, after the line that Matteo shared, he goes on, the high and luminous tension breaks too soon. The body's stone stillness and the life's hushed trance, the breathless might and calm of silent mind. Or slowly they fail as sets a golden day. And the restless nether members tire of peace. So there's as if unsustainability of being purely in the causal state, being purely in oneness, and it seems to descend back into multiplicity, into all of the other realms, and so I find that instructive, that there is almost a romance he describes at first of, or he does actually say that, use that word, that he's initiated the king into, I think, what we could describe as the source of his power, authority, and being. And then that becomes like once he's plugged in or rooted in that, it enables this journey that proceeds. So I think that I'm seeing the arc or the form of at least this part of the canto, or at least one part of that arc.
It's 12 o'clock.
And it's interesting that he describes it as a state and a place. While there, one can, this is page 32, while there, one can be wider than the world. While there, one is one's own infinity. And his center was no more in earthly mind. And I aspire to this as well, Andrea. I like as well that reading this, even in the midst of what has been a busy couple of weeks, I feel reminded and or unminded in a way of uh, unminded of my the crowd of obligations and activities, and reminded of the source of them all.
I'm just struck. I just want to say this because I'm just so struck by it, Marco. Looking at your image from here, it's like you're wearing a golden crown. It looks absolutely splendid with your black hair, and this picture in the back of you is like a crown. It's like a supramental something. It's very nice. And then, of course, Matteo has the explosion of the Shakti in the universe behind his head.
Which is Andrea's painting, actually.
Well, not mine, but
well, she didn't paint it, yeah, but it's on loan on my wall. But dear friend Phil painted it.
Yeah.
Marco, I think I'm sensing that you're keen into a key difference between Sri Aurobindo and the Mother's Yoga and Ramana Maharshi's yoga. They were contemporaries. The ashrams were near each other. Mother and Sri Aurobindo sometimes, I think I've heard reported that they would send sadhaks there to meditate. But there was always the question, Ramana Maharshi looking to realize and help people realize the silent self. Thou art that, the Vedic realization. Sri Aurobindo and the Mother continually said, okay, I'm joking right now. Okay, that's easy. Now what? Right? Because their answer to that question, now what? Now be a channel to go to work in the world and to realize that and bring that into all of our fields. The now what is from Krishna and Arjuna on the battlefield of Kurukshetra. Now what? Do the yoga and then go to work. Do the yoga and then fare forward and forget about faring well. But help realize and channel all these beings that are useful for the evolution and to become that. And I feel like there's something about this canto. I almost called it this consciousness. I feel like I'm bathing in consciousness with this first yoga of the king. This canto just is. It's so filled. It's packed with beans all over the place. We could spend a long time with this.
There's a passage that I really like. It's about 2 pages into the second section that we were reading. He lived in the mystic space where thought is born and will is nursed by an ethereal power and fed on the white milk of the eternal strengths till it grows into the likeness of a god. It seems to suggest that the space itself is what grows into the likeness of a god, which is, for me, a kind of fascinating image. I don't know whether you have any feedback about that particular passage.
I'm still looking for it.
On page 28, a couple of lines down.
Oh, thank you.
The way I read it, he's living in a certain place, the mystic space. And from this place, thought is born. And in this place, will is nursed by this ethereal power until it grows into the likeness of a god. So will here, it's like a little continuation of what Matteo was talking about. The will being so strengthened that it's like a god, so that it can do this work, which is the work here in matter, in the evolutionary world, not in the far beyond realms.
Thank you, that helps.
You're welcome.
Yeah, and I believe Sri Aurobindo points to the will as the most essential part in the yoga. The right use of the will is the foundation of the yoga.
Would you
Go ahead, Marco.
would you say, Matteo, that the will is one of the elements that is not included in the Advaita tradition of absorption into the self, and that part of what is being described here is more of an incarnational kind of mysticism, where that immersion in self leads to a life process, through, in this telling, the birth of Savitri, but that being prepared by this intentionality, this act of will on the part of the king, and that will being not a personal based desire, but one that's rooted in that self. That's how I'm reading it, but I'm not a scholar of the tradition, so.
Nor am I. Yeah. So every time I'm hearing the word will, also my practice with the Rig Veda, with hymns to the mystic fire, comes ever present to the forefront, and the will is not the silent self that you're talking about, but it's birthed from that silent self, and it's Agni, it's matter, it's fire, it's guided by Chit Shakti, power, heat, Chit Tapas. And this passage that Jeffrey selected is incredibly Vedic, right? This the white milk, the word in Sanskrit go is cow, and it's light. And the rishis are constantly, the Vedic rishis are constantly making, we can call them modern similes, but they're not quite that. They're constantly talking about drinking from the udders, right? They're not walking up, but this is why cows are also so sacred, because they are divine light. This title of respect that the rishis and the Buddha have, Gautama, that has the go in it, that has cow, that has the light in it. And this, when you were talking, Marco, I know you've put it in terms of a question, but it just seemed like it was turning on itself. There's no real stopping point. You asked, I'm not an Advaita scholar, so I have a hard time teasing all of this stuff out. But Advaita is non-dualism, and this is dualistic non-dualism and qualified monism all at the same time. Sri Aurobindo has literally integrated everything. It's really hard to articulate, because he has, and I think anyone that Debashish talks about this, anyone that approaches Sri Aurobindo eventually has to approach his entire body of work, because within his entire body of work is the entire synthesis. It's not just one thing or the other, but it's contained in everything that he's written. And it quite possibly may take numerous lifetimes. I don't know.
I love this canto because it's like one experience after another, and one sense and one part of the being after another being opened up. It's just like like revelation on revelation on revelation.
That reminds me of the sentence, each day with a spiritual romance. Every moment could be a spiritual romance.
This subsection that we were talking about, Katie Setna titled "A Magical Accord," and the subsection that Andrea read from, he titled "The Silent Self," subtitled. Did people catch there's a reference to Heraclitus? War is the father of all things. Is the Heraclitus quote, but somewhere in this reading, up at the bottom of 32. If you have line numbers, it's line 386. The war of thoughts that fathers the universe. I think that line really articulates what Heraclitus means by war is the father of all things. It's kind of for me, it's been an obscure or dense aphorism to sink into. War is the father of all things. What the hell do you mean by that, Heraclitus? But here, the clash of forces struggling to prevail in the tremendous shock that lights a star, as in the building of a grain of dust, the grooves that turn their dumb ellipse in space, plowed by the seeking of the world's desire, the long regurgitations of time's flood, the torment edging the dire force of light. There's something so modern and sexual about that line. Lust,
darling.
the torment. I read it wrong, but my eyes read it right. The torment edging the dire force of lust. Oh, Sri Aurobindo. That wakes kinetic in earth's dullard slime and carves a personality out of mud. The sorrow by which nature's hunger is fed, the estrus which creates with fire and pain, the fate that punishes virtue with defeat, the tragedy that destroys long happiness, the weeping of love, the quarrel of the gods, ceased in a truth which lives in its own light. War is the father of all things. That summarizes the Heraclitus aphorism right there, and more so. Sri Aurobindo loved Heraclitus, however you say his name.
I'm glad you pointed that out. My eyes were looking at that very passage just when you went into it. And I hadn't caught the reference to Heraclitus, I think it's pronounced. But I was taken by this passage in particular because it's like, it seems to be that almost the encapsulation of everything that's extinguished in the nirvanic state, that I think he's pointing to here, the cessation. Like nirvana means cessation, essentially, right? And this is Shakespearean. It's almost like a summary of Shakespeare in a way. All of the slings and arrows of outrageous fortune are quelled in this absorption into the self and its light. And from the very next line is the liberation, I think. Like it's at that moment of liberation. From that cessation, his soul stood free, a witness and a king, absorbed no more in the moment-ridden flux, where mind incessantly drifts as on a raft, hurried from phenomenon to phenomenon. He abode at rest in indivisible time. And I love that. I think that's a great passage, because that's mostly what life is like, is one thing after another. What didn't Churchill say? History is one damn thing after another. I think that's what is being transcended here. But again, it's to return, and I think that's the important thing, is not merely to be lost in phenomena, but to return to the source of phenomena and then re-engage phenomena, re-engage life and the world as king, like as one who has one who's dwelling, perhaps we can say, in that's space, that mystic space, that source space, in that power. So I don't have anything else to add to that, and I'm getting deluged by the stray phenomena of time, with cell phone notifications darting in. But I also agree, John Robert, that this whole passage takes the reader from scene to scene to scene, like takes you on that arc, takes you on an arc from the world of matter and the human realm to the absolute, to the eternal, and very, very vividly. So I think that's all I have to say at this moment.
I was thinking it's quite unlike anything else that's ever been written, maybe. Right? It's a bit unique in the way it does this.
Yeah, I like to say nobody can write like this. This kind of writing is impossible. There's nobody that can write like this in a sustained way. Except there obviously is somebody that can.
Yeah, I've been such a big fan of poetry my whole life, but when people ask me who are my favorite poets and what are my favorite poems, I almost leave this one out. This is like for me, it's just in a completely different, it's in a different realm. He wrote the book called The Future Poetry, and he's writing about the possibilities and the future of poetry in prose form. And he's been criticized by people because poetry hasn't gone the route that he was talking about it going in the future poetry. However, he wrote the future poetry somewhere 1914 to 1921, and then he went ahead and just fulfilled the predictions of the future poetry, not only by writing Savitri, but by writing the sonnets of 1930 to 1950. Those sonnets are unparalleled in poetry also. I haven't ever encountered anything that comes close to the effect that it has on my soul. The transformative potential, I think, is what I haven't encountered in other poetry. And contemporary poetry, I'm not even sure. I call it almost contemporary. A lot of contemporary poetry, I think, is kind of in the dirty path of descent, really trying to go for purification of what's going on with us right now. I appreciate contemporary poetry, but it's like we almost need to figure out how to marry all of these things to work with it all together. But Sri Aurobindo's, like, the transformative effect is, for me, it's unparalleled.
I would agree, Matteo. I think a lot of contemporary poetry is focused on the personal dimension and uh, working with trauma, working with um, the struggle of being a human being in a very tumultuous time and in a time of a lot of conflict, a lot of big transitions occurring. Uh, some, well, I don't even know actually what contemporary poetry is in a certain way, because it also has fractured into many different schools and groups, and there isn't quite the same sense of tradition that I think that Aurobindo was attuned to, uh, particularly in the English tradition and the way that he married that with the Indian tradition. I think as postmodern people, we now have a global tradition, except it's not quite a tradition yet. It hasn't really been constellated as such. It's just a big mass of information and data and different kinds of things. But insofar as there is something like poetry or literary scene still or establishment, I see a lot of personal poetry and a lot of conceptual poetry that's more at the mental level of ideas or of aesthetic experiments. But what I think is here in Aurobindo, which I think is also in the other poets that we've been reading in alternate weeks, Milton, Blake, and Whitman. And I believe we can look to there's a sort of other tradition or counter tradition that doesn't exactly have a place, or if it when it is given a place, it is truncated in some way, but it doesn't have a place in the mainstream. It doesn't have a place in traditional scholarship or the academy. And I think part of it is that it's plugged into this Gnostic and to this divine source, and it's writing out of there and um, attempting, or and in the best cases like this, accomplishing this marriage of the infinite and the finite, so that it could be personal, it could be human oriented, but it's not only that. And where the human and the personal become symbols of larger realities or deeper realities, uh, but not merely like representations of it, not just signs of it, actual like embodiments of it. This incarnational, I think, evolutionary is another word that might describe it. Involutionary, I think, is another. It's invo and evolutionary. I think it takes a realizer to write this kind of poetry, and a realizer in multiple senses: a spiritual realizer, an artistic realizer, a realizer in language, someone who's plumbed the depths of language and is able to write in a way which is in dialogue with a tradition. Is That takes a lot of study. That takes a lot of immersion, and to like just include a reference to Heraclitus, for example. In, One has to be sensitive to that, as you are, to hear the way that that works, because it works in this poem, but it also works as a a dialogue, with uh, a very deep tradition. In this case, a reference to the ancient Greeks, and I believe that there's still poetry to be written in the future. That I would hope I hope picks up on this path that Aurobindo has been on, has taken, uh, because I think that this is transformational poetry. It transfigures the human life in a way that um, sometimes I think contemporary poetry almost traps us more, or can, uh, in various ways, uh, because it hasn't necessarily, and the poet may not have traveled, into that. Well, they come from it, but they may not have recognized or reintegrated their spiritual being, and they're maybe working their way towards there, but but there's still like that purification. I think that's maybe one way of looking at it too. I haven't looked at it that way, but the purificatory process of getting through all the ego's stuff and getting through all of the contemporary and pushing into deeper and deeper layers of meaning and of resonance too, and of power. That's the thing too. A lot of times, like, this is a sustained long poem, and it goes on, and that's almost unthinkable these days. Like, that someone would have the attention span, let alone to read this, to write it. We're in a different time, and I think the stresses and the pressures of our mediascape and of our social complexities in one sense, it makes poetry like this a lot harder, but it also makes it a lot more necessary, a lot more valuable, because I think it can bring us back. And I think there's something about going back. We've gone down, we generally, socially, gone down this road of technology and of complexification, almost, I think, to the logical conclusion. And much like the poet in this canto does, we need to return to source and reconnect with power and recreate a world that is amenable to the infinite, rather than in flight from it into endless permutations of finitude.
Or in flight to it, to escape.
So I'd like to respond that this is Sri Aurobindo's work. This is his life's work, Savitri. And he wrote it with this specific purpose, to transmit the consciousness that he brought down. There's no way to compare him as a poet to anyone on some level, because he's not coming from a regular human consciousness. He's coming from realization. And he's transmitting his realizations to us, to humanity. And it's a task way beyond poetry. Although poetry clearly is the vehicle, the perfect vehicle that he chose. When he said to Mother he was going to start this, he said, I am embarking into the unknown. I'm embarking into the unknown, come what may. This is his journey, and he is writing it as he is experiencing it, and as Mother was experiencing it. And so beyond this is why I do believe they are the double avatar. They are the bringers down of a consciousness that we have not had access to, except for maybe an occasional here and there enlightened being, but not as humanity. So that's my little...
Thank you, Andrea. There's a lovely essay written by Georges von Veckerum called The Kalki Avatar, where he explains deeply what Andrea just said, that the Sri Aurobindo and the Mother are the Kalki Avatar, but that's a kind of a different subject, and a beautiful little essay to look at. I think the essay's in a book called The New Spirituality. It might be in a different book, but I think it's in that book.
I'll just make a comment about the poetic tradition now. I think as a species, right now, we don't know where we're going. So we don't really have, all our traditions are either broken up. Our institutions are breaking up. Our institutions are failing. And so you have these glimpses of brilliance from different places. But in terms of, worldwide poetry or English poetry or whatever, it's like we're in a place where our old story is broken, and we're trying to find a new way. And so I think it's not surprising that the older poetic traditions are not represented much anymore, and people are experimenting with all kinds of things, trying to find out what the way is. And yeah, so these, I mean, to me, there's nobody like Sri Aurobindo. I don't see how anybody can write like this. And he said that when he wrote, his mind was silent. So he wasn't writing with the mind. He was just receiving.
That alone is almost impossible for the modern human to even understand, like what a silent mind means and is. I'd like to just say blessed be to all the contemporary poets. There's a poetry renaissance happening right here in Santa Cruz. So I assume around the country we have a poet laureate, we have a tradition of a county poet laureate, and there's readings everywhere. And for me, it was missing. When I was in high school and early college years, I used to hang out at Moe's, Cody's, and Shambhala books on Telegraph Avenue. And there was poetry readings 3 or 4 times a week at Cody's books. And it seemed like when Amazon came, that tradition buckled. It seems, I don't know, it seems like that tradition buckled in ways that I now see an incredible resurgence in. And I've been brought to tears by some contemporary poetry that that touches on those points that are screaming to be purified. But then I seem to move on. Like I don't necessarily linger with that like I do with Whitman, Eliot, and again, Sri Aurobindo is kind of in its own. It's its own thing to me. So I have a real hard time comparing to other poets because of the consciousness that comes through that I think we're all feeling today.
I am feeling it too. And I don't want to be harsh either to contemporary poets or poetry, or because it's really hard right now. This is a very dark time. And I think I could see how one could lob a critique and say, well, this is all spiritual stuff and it doesn't get to the real, like, gritty, things that are going on, and the what's most pressing in our minds as we see what's happening politically and ecologically, and in our social spheres, and with the acceleration of technology. There are things that are part of contemporary experience that are not reflected in this text because they hadn't yet happened. They hadn't yet emerged as phenomena to be included. And so I think what was also different here about this text, and what I'm perceiving, is it's not just, and to Andrea's point, it's not just poetry. There's a larger project going on. The poetry is a transmission, perhaps, of that state, that consciousness. It's a direct, like, communication of the consciousness. But at the same time, as I know third hand or second hand, it's part of an educational initiative. It's part of training people. It's part of parenting. Like, I think Aurobindo saw the integralness of poetry to life, and how not only do we need poetry, but we also need schools, and we need different kinds of governance, and we need different ways of doing business, and that those, rather than being driven by purely human desires like survival and power, profit, and or just a security, that those can become containers for, vehicles for the spiritual, for the infinite. And I think that that's a larger poetry in a way, like that the words are one level of poetry, and then the vision of what a possible way forward for human beings and for beings, for us as living conscious beings could be. I think that's a larger and a different kind of poetry, because our species is lost right now. We don't know what we're doing, and so where is the vision coming from? I think it's coming. This is, I think, a channel of that, a channeling of that vision, and it's certainly part of what draws me to it, because I am or have felt lost with the rest of us, and I think that we need to keep a kind of aperture open for that light, that light that could show us a new way, because we need one. And so I look forward to continuing to read, and to continuing to write, and to discover new poetry that is maybe inspired by this, and is, drawing on this tradition, this what I'm calling a tradition. I think it's a kind of unspoken tradition, or counter tradition, or something. Maybe it's a new tradition. Maybe it's not going to be a Western or an Eastern. Maybe we're moving towards a cosmic tradition that will have a new poetry that inaugurates a new kind of way of being on this earth and in this cosmos. So I think that's part of what we're doing here, is keeping that tradition, or that counter tradition, or that new tradition, keeping it alive, and doing kind of the infinitesimal labor of bringing that light into the present. Thank you.
Yes, I do believe that that's what we're doing here. All of us in our own little individuality, we are opening to this light that we need. And I'm just reminded, as you spoke, of this wonderful line by Leonard Cohen, one of our beloved contemporary poets, where he said, it's through the cracks that the light comes in. So everything is cracking. So there's a lot of light coming in. We may not see it, but everything's cracking, and that's how the light can come in. I love that line. That is so perfect. When I crack open, there's a possibility for me to get something beyond me. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
I was so happy to be here with you all.
And Cohen is such a spiritual poet too, right? Yeah. So, sorry, I didn't mean to step in, Andrea. I don't have a lot to say on top of what everybody else has said. In the world of literature, or even social science, there's this kind of discourse that we've moved away from grand narrative, and this is a grand narrative. And you can kind of see it in contemporary culture, that although grand narratives are there, they're in popular forms rather than like film and things like that. You see grand narrative, but you don't see a lot of it in literature anymore. but I don't think it's gone away forever. So I think this is part of what's going on, is that there's a struggle going on to find a way to give voice to grand narrative, but not necessarily in the traditional forms. And it's something more collective. I think what's coming is something more collective. I don't think we know what it is yet, but even the discussion here, I mean, in a way, to me, the fact that we read these texts, I mean, here we're reading Savitri, in the parallel group, we're reading Paradise Lost, for instance, which is another grand epic. And I think that the collective reading is itself its own form of listening. And the fact that we record and put up the results on the net, right? So, I mean, people have been doing collective readings for years, but in the privacy of homes or in the privacy of a small group of friends or that kind of context, not necessarily. I mean, this is different. This is, some of us are in California, some of us are in Canada. We're in different parts of the world, and we're doing this collectively. I think this is part of the culture that's trying to birth, right? Is a collective, and I think the poetry that's trying to come into being is a kind of collective. Although I don't know what that will look like ultimately. Anyway, that's I guess what I had to say. But I love doing this. So
I have one short quote from Sri Aurobindo that I'd like to read that I think is pertinent to what we've been talking about. This is my favorite statement of what he's about. He and Mother are about. This is from the Synthesis of Yoga. He says, what we propose in our yoga is nothing less than to break up the whole formation of our past and present, which makes up the ordinary material and mental man. A new center of attention and a new universe of activities in ourselves, which shall constitute a divine humanity or a human nature.
That's pretty radical, actually.
I
Right?
sense it's happening. It's super radical. I see it in Leonard Cohen, his album Old Ideas, where he's in dialogue the whole album with the Orishas, with the beings that are writing through him. And the old ideas that he's talking about are incredibly modern and contemporary. I think of Bob Dylan and the album Bringing It All Back Home, and the song Love Minus Zero, where he says, my love speaks like silence without ideals or violence. Trying to get us away from the old narratives, because there was a painful oppression happening from those old narratives in 1967 or whenever he wrote that line. And the contemporary hip-hop artist, poet Mos Def says incredible things. Yasin Bey says things like poetry is medicine for loneliness. There's something when poetry is drawing us toward oneness, all of a sudden there's no loneliness in that space of oneness. It's like that we don't have a hole in us anymore. There's when the more connectivity I have with the infinite, the less my desire body is craving and longing. And so I love that Mos Def calls it medicine for loneliness. It's there's so much beauty happening all around. I'm super happy that many of us aren't forming our ideas of what the world is by what's going on in the news. When I look in everyone's eyes around Panama and Santa Cruz, and I'm on my way to Minnesota, I I'm like almost unattached to place at this time, although I have a foundation here. I see it everywhere I go. Just the sun-eyed children of a marvelous dawn. That's us. And it's all of us, and it's all around. I'm even more and more like really appreciating and loving Donald Trump in he's holding in like the most divine ignorance all this karma that's just passing through him, and he's like able to sit up straight and withstand all this like this barrage. I don't know if he's the Asura or if he's channeling the Asura to be able to help break up this manifestation. I'm just like filled with appreciation and love for him at times. And no, I'm not going to vote for him, but I'm loving him more and more. On that note, wow, I can't believe I just admitted that in a recorded conversation.
Oh my gosh.
I don't care anymore.
That's not a politically correct view. But poetry is often not politically correct, and that's part of its power. And sun-eyed children of a marvelous dawn. Was that
That's
line?
true. That's true.
Okay.
One of the most famous passages. I saw the omnipotent's flaming pioneers over the heavenly verge which turns towards life, come crowding down the amber stairs of birth. Forerunners of a divine multitude, out of the paths of the morning star they came, into the little room of mortal life. I saw them cross the twilight of an age, the sun-eyed children of a marvelous dawn, the great creators with wide brows of calm, the massive barrier breakers of the world, and wrestlers with destiny in her lists of will, the laborers in the quarries of the gods, the messengers of the incommunicable, the architects of immortality. I could go on, but I'll stop there.
That's beautiful. Where is that from?
It's from Savitri.
Yeah, it's from.
It's coming.
Yeah, it's coming. Sorry to plot spoil. It's in the vision and the boon in that canto. That's Ashwapati actually retorting to the Divine Mother when the Divine Mother is saying, no, the manifestation isn't ready for Savitri's birth. Sri Aurobindo, Andrea got teary-eyed. It's that passage is Andrea is a 1971 Aurovillian. This passage is like the mantra of Auroville, and the early Aurovillians saw themselves, rightfully so, as the sun-eyed children of the marvelous dawn. But this is Ashwapati's retort to the Divine Mother, saying the manifestation isn't ready, and Ashwapati / Sri Aurobindo is like, no, they're coming down the amber stairs, out of the paths of Venus, out of the paths of the morning star, into the little room of mortal life, to break the barriers, to give the message from the incommunicable, to be the architects of immortality. Faces that are wearing the immortal's glory still, seeing eyes of a diviner man. That passage just goes on and on. It gives me goosebumps. And Andrea and I had this moment right after Donald Trump was elected where our group was like, wherever we were, we went right back to this canto and read this canto on our meeting session after that election, where everyone that I knew was disheartened and really struggling with life. And I think I was shaking during this passage. Just I could barely even hold the consciousness that was present and available to us. I have so much appreciation for Savitri, Sri Aurobindo.
So I guess we don't have time to read more today.
What a lively discussion this has been.
It's wonderful to really go so beautifully into each piece. Just lovely. I've never done it this way. Very nice.
I'll say too that I've enjoyed just listening to your voices, and sometimes I just close my eyes and listen, and that's something that is possible in this format. And to Jeffrey's point about some kind of new form or some kind of new way of collective reading or channeling or embodiment, I feel that happening here when I can resonate, when I can feel your voices and become I'm almost lifted by them, and then come back and give my voice to the words. I really enjoy this, and even though in the flux of things, I was like, it's another thing on my schedule. But once we're here, everything else drops away, um, and I'm
What better thing
replenished.
could we be doing? Tell me.
Oh, I have a long list. Yeah.
Phenomenon to phenomenon. I have that list too. It's a
One damn
different
thing
list.
after the other. All right. Well, I should move on to the next
So,
phenomenon.
could we do a meditation to finish? Would that be okay? And
I'd like that.
I just wanted to let you know that I can't guarantee I'll be there next time in 2 weeks. I'll be in the south of France, and I will try to get on, but I won't guarantee it.
Mm. The time zone could work.
It could work because it's kind of 7 in the or 6 or 7 in the evening. I can't remember, but
Well, I hope that will work because it's beautiful to have you.
yes.
Yeah, I hope you can
Well,
make it.
It's very fun to get you from the south of France.
it's a priority, but
Anyone else have any comment before we meditate?
Thanks, everybody. Until next time.
Everyone,
Bye-bye.
Thank you, friends.
be well. Good travels.
Thank you.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.